Caloroga Shark Media.
From Poolside, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. I got to tell you, the Poolside audio has been going up pretty well. It almost sounds better than me actually using the studio. The Cut did a big profile of Nikki Glaser. Nikki having a moment, but none of it about her new special. The headline, The Toast of the Roast. Comedian Nikki Glaser has been in the business for decades, but her set on Tom Brady's roast seems to have shifted something. Yes, it has. Glaser started doing stand-up when she was 18, had an open mic at University of Colorado Boulder. She moved to L.A., did various stand-up at bars, got an appearance on Last Comic Standing. She was invited to do her first roast of Rob Lowe in 2016 by Comedy Central, who'd seen her on Jeff Ross's show The Burn. She's had a few high-profile, short-lived projects, including Not Safe with Nikki Glaser on Comedy Central. I don't even remember that one, canceled after one season. And F-Boy Island on HBO Max, canceled after 2 seasons. She was on Dancing with the Stars in 2018. Really? And first one voted off. Okay. She was on Bruce Willis's roast where she said, I know you as the star of every DVD you just kind of find on the street. A year later, Alec Baldwin was roasted. Nikki says, that time I was really speaking from what do I actually think of these people rather than what's the funniest joke. She was asked to do her Max special Someday You'll Die a year ago. It came out on May 11th, 6 days after the roast. She'd planned to do 2 weeks of press, but then many of the same people who had said no to her suddenly said yes. She was invited on Kimmel, Hoda, Howard, Seth, and said she felt like Taylor Swift for a day. I'll point out, still no buzz on the special. She tells The Cut, finding a way to be yourself on stage is hard. When I was 4 years into comedy, it started emerging in little places, and I'd be like, oh, what did I just do? But people really responded to it. She cites Sarah Silverman as one of her major inspirations. She seems really nice, but she says crazy things. I like being met where people still like me and are rooting for me, even if I can show sides of myself that are cuckoo. She wants people to say about her, she was really nice. I know that sounds crazy, but that's my favorite compliment as opposed to funny. She tells The Cut, I practiced my Tom Brady set like 55 times, different variations of it, and I never once apologized in any of those. When I got up there, I literally felt bad. She says she understands that things going away is what happens in this line of work. Since the Brady special, she says, everyone's been telling her everything's different. I'm like, she says with a skeptical tone. It was fun being in the belle of the ball, but now it's kind of cooled off, and thank God. She'd like to do SNL in theory, but when she thinks about it, she gets nervous. So I'm sort of like, I just did a thing that people are happy about. Can I just tour now? I'm comfortable touring. I don't get nervous touring. WTTW spoke to Rob Smigel. They asked him his idea for fun when he's in town. He said, my idea of fun is just going to a Giordano's and eating an entire pizza by myself. I would give the same answer, except I'd go to Lou Malnati's, and the locals were like, why are you going to those? I don't know, man, because it's right there. I don't know. Why are you getting Ray's Pizza in Manhattan? Same thing. Back to the pizza. Smigel says, I dream about it all year long. I still don't understand why they can't bake them in other cities, but I'm grateful because I'd look like George Wendt and Chris Farley combined if deep dish pizza was available to me every day. I grew up in Manhattan, and I remember driving to Chicago and just being amazed that you had a lake. Dude, I did the same thing. We have the crappy Hudson River that nobody can swim in, and you guys had a beach. And then I went to Wrigley Field, and I was able to get seats in the front row. You could never do that at Shea Stadium. I walked up to the box office and said, you got any good seats? And they said, yeah, we got some right behind the dugout. That good? You want that? I got to be in Chicago the night the Cubs won the World Series. Triumph covered it. I was doing a show for Hulu as Triumph. That was a good show, and it was a political show, but I was the boss. I was the producer and star of the show, and Game 7 was happening, and I was like, wait a minute. I could just say I want Triumph to go to the World Series, and they'll fly me there. Then I was like, no, I don't want to be in Cleveland for Game 7. I want the night outside Wrigley, because if they win, it's going to be the greatest thing ever, and if they lose, it'll be really funny. He then went into Triumph. Do I have a half-ass Triumph? I've never attempted a half-ass Triumph. Let's see what happens here. Okay, human beings are separated from this by only one single chromosome. By the way, it's great to be here. The interviewer says, cicadas? Sorry, the correct answer is, what is Marjorie Taylor Greene? We would have also accepted Jake and Logan Paul. Not the worst half-ass Triumph. I amused myself. He did one more. In 2023, sales of Bud Light dropped significantly due to this. The interviewer says, I give up. What is Ben Affleck having a dry January? Now I'm losing it. Luckily, I have this slushie here. My daughter just brought me a slushie. I had it for a minute there. All right, no more half-ass Triumph. Now I'm reading the transcript here. It's unclear to me if this is Smigel speaking or quote-unquote Triumph. I'll just do it flat because I've kind of lost my muse now. Whoever it was said, I feel bad for Trump. I really do. I mean, the one time he actually pays someone, they indict him for it. Oh, here's one. Triumph. How is Conan O'Brien? Are you still friends? He does a podcast now, and I'm so proud of him and how he's evolved, you know? He used to be a nervous host who'd cut off his guests. Now in his podcast, he's an experienced, confident host who cut off his guests. Then they said, thank you, Triumph. Please put Rob back on the phone. Joel Kim Booster is sharing why his focus is on not being a trailblazer. He spoke to Variety. Joel says, it's difficult because I'm not somebody who went to this wanting to be an advocate or trailblazer or anything. I just wanted to make people laugh. All the rest of it is a byproduct. You can't prioritize it. You can't be mission first, joke second, and be successful. He says it actually makes him really uncomfortable when people call him a trailblazer, and he feels that term should be used for comedians who help pave the way for others. Joel says, I started doing comedy at a very convenient time for someone like me. It wasn't easy, but there weren't the same barriers to entry that I think there were, a decade before I started. He calls Guy Brainum the godfather of gay guy comedians and is a big fan of Margaret Cho. As a queer Asian person coming up, I devoured everything Margaret Cho did. She's always been such a firebrand. She didn't wait around for someone to open the door. She knocked it down herself. That appealed to me. Kathy Griffin back on tour, and she says, I'm the face of the 1.5-lunged community, of which there really isn't a community. She says the hardest part of selling tickets is she's a woman in an inherently male-dominant industry. Kathy said, misogyny is so hardcore with stand-up. I know that sounds like I'm being bitter, but I'm not. Washington Post did a big profile of Paul Scheer. He has a new book called Joyful Recollections of Trauma. Paul says, my parents haven't read it. They will read it. My dad has requested not to read it until he gets back from his trip in Europe because he didn't want it to wreck his trip. My mom will read it. I love my parents and I have a very good relationship with them. Part of the reason I wrote this book in my own privacy and without involving June, his wife, or my parents, was because I wanted to feel like I could tell the stories that I wanted to tell in the way I wanted to tell them without feeling like I had somebody watching over me. I felt like the minute I added that to the process, I would start to second guess it. So my mantra was, I'm telling my story, I'm not telling their story. Paul says, I was worried at a certain point my publisher was going to ask me to write a chapter about the League. And I was dreading that because I didn't see how it would fit thematically into the book. And a quick anecdote, a couple years ago at the airport, I'm going through TSA and this guy goes, I know who you are. You're Robin Williams. I told him I wasn't Robin, but he went, don't worry about it. I'll keep it cool. Scheer says, sometimes I'll accept comments I don't deserve because it's easier. But in this case, Robin had been dead a couple years, so it was extra weird. So I said, screw it, I'm Robin Williams. And thanked him for the kind words. I just took it. If you want me to be Robin Williams, I'll do it. That's how far I'll go. Bill Burr was on KNBR radio, and he was sticking up for Barry Bonds. And here's Bill to take us into the break.
Barry Bonds is a victim of the steroid era. Barry Bonds was the guy, and then a bunch of people cheated, and then the president was calling them instead of Barry, and Barry was like, all right, here's me on steroids. Here's 73. What are we doing here? I can do it with or without steroids. I can beat if nobody's doing steroids, I can beat you. If we're all doing steroids, I can beat you. My only complaint about that era is that when the guys would go up with that medieval manner, like metal sleeve from their shoulder all the way down their wrist, and they'd be leaning out over the plate. I'm not a big fan of the admiring the home run and pointing at the dugout, and the next guy doesn't get beamed in the head. I miss those days.
All right, on Saturday, I've got my interview with Mark Malkoff, the host of the Inside Late Night podcast and the former host of the Carson podcast, which is still available if you want to download and check out the nearly 400 episodes of Carson Talk. I liked Mark a lot. We spoke for an hour. If you'd like to hear it right now, become a premium subscriber. You've heard the promos. Click the link in the show notes, caloroga.supportingcast.fm, $4.99 a month. You get the shows early. We've solved that whole thing where I had to get up in the morning and preload the show. It'll be there for you. The show's commercial free, and you get the occasional early release, maybe even some bonus content at some point. Greg Gutfeld stuck up for Jerry Seinfeld. Remember, Jerry was saying he missed manly men, or whatever he said, dominant masculinity was Jerry's line. Gutfeld said, I also miss the days when men were men and women were not. But think about the unbridled masculinity of yesteryear. You know what I'm talking about, right? A guy who could put the Marlboro Man to shame, a man's man if you've ever seen one, and he held up a picture of Liberace. There's a new Jim Henson biography, and we learned from this that the plan for Fozzie Bear was for Fozzie Bear to be a great comedian. Jim Henson said, we knew we wanted to have a stand-up comedian. We had in mind a Red Skelton type of character that was a bundle of anxieties offstage and a gung-ho storyteller up front. But the idea that Fozzie's insecurities would be counterbalanced by his on-stage prowess didn't work. Muppet performer Jerry Jewell said Fozzie was a disaster. We said, this is a bad comedian, so we put him on stage and let him be bad. But letting Fozzie eat it on stage wasn't great either, and Statler and Waldorf heckling him only made Fozzie seem more pathetic. Frank Oz knew it was bad, didn't know what to do with it. They changed the puppet. Fozzie's fur became a brighter orange, and his perpetual grimace was removed. Fozzie instead became a perpetual optimist, thanks to Frank Oz, who discovered that Fozzie was just a simple guy who wanted to be funny and loved. And that is your comedy news for today. All right, if you'd like the show ad-free, there's the link in the show notes there, or pay attention to the promo, which will probably run next. It usually does. See you tomorrow.